Imagine a world where honor was a currency, loyalty was a prison, and the only way out was to betray everything you ever loved. This is not a fable. This is the life of Henry Hill. If you think you know his story from the silver screen, you are about to discover the chilling, unvarnished truth that even Hollywood couldn't fully capture. The truth of a man who lived the American dream in reverse. So, settle in, close your eyes if you wish, and listen closely now to the sound of a Brooklyn street in the 1950s. The distant rumble of the elevated train, the shouts of mothers from tenement windows, the scuffle of shoes on hot pavement. And in the middle of it all, a young boy with Irish blood, standing across the street from the only establishment in the neighborhood that commanded genuine, universal respect. The cab stand of Paul Vario, the local capo of the Lucchese Crime Family. For young Henry Hill, this wasn't a place of fear, it was a dazzling stage. He watched, mesmerized, as men who weren't kings wore their authority like fine silk suits. They didn't work the docks or drive trucks, they stood. They talked. They made things happen with a nod. They possessed a tangible power that his hard-working, blue-collar father, a man who came home exhausted and defeated every night, could never fathom. This, Henry decided with the brutal clarity of a child, was the only way to live. And so, at 11 years old, he began his apprenticeship. He started running errands, fetching cigarettes, delivering messages, watching for cops. The cab stand was his Harvard and Yale, and the curriculum was pure, unadulterated graft. He learned that a well-placed lie was more valuable than honesty, that a stolen carton of cigarettes could buy a week's loyalty, and that the police were not guardians but simply another, less sophisticated gang to be managed. He was smart, eager, and most importantly, he wasn't Italian. This, paradoxically, became his greatest asset. Because Henry Hill could never be a made man, he was never a threat to the established hierarchy. He was a tool, an associate, a moneymaker, and he was desperate to prove his worth. By his teens, Henry was a fully operational criminal, skipping school to work at the cab stand, soaking in the rituals and the ruthless logic of the life. His first arrest came at 16, and his response was pure ecstasy. He had been validated. When Paul Vario's brother, Lenny, bailed him out, Henry felt a surge of belonging more potent than any family bond. He was in. The Varios became his true family. He learned the intricate dance of hijacking trucks, how to charm a driver with a fake badge, how to unload a cargo of designer dresses in under an hour, how to make a hijacked load of meat disappear into a network of butchers before the truck was even reported missing. He mastered the art of the fix, bribing law enforcement and court officials with an offhand ease. But Henry's real genius lay in his boundless, entrepreneurial hustle. He saw opportunity in every corner. He ran gambling rings, set up credit card scams, dealt in stolen securities, and became a maestro of the airport rackets at Idlewild, soon to be JFK. He understood that the Mafia's power wasn't just in violence, but in its seamless infiltration of legitimate commerce. He didn't just steal, he integrated. He married a nice Jewish girl, Karen, and pulled her into his glittering, unstable orbit, showering her with fur coats and stolen jewelry, building a life of frantic, cash-fueled extravagance. He was living the dream he'd seen from that sidewalk as a boy. But this dream had a constant, gnawing hunger. The money was never enough. The respect was always conditional. And the shadow of his non-Italian blood meant that no matter how much he earned for the family, he would always be an outsider, forever one mistake away from being deemed expendable. He was building a palace on a foundation of quicksand, and the deeper he dug, the more he needed to prove he belonged to a club that would never, ever have his name on the membership roll. The 1970s dawned, and Henry Hill's world expanded from the boroughs of New York to the sun-bleached tarmac of Kennedy Airport. This was his kingdom, his masterpiece of corruption. Through his partnership with the unlikeliest of allies, a sharp, ambitious airline cargo worker named Robert "Frenchie" McMahon, and a quiet, terrifyingly efficient thief named James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke, Henry helped weave a criminal network of breathtaking audacity and sophistication. It wasn't just about hijacking anymore. It was about ownership. They controlled the union. They paid off the security guards, the ramp agents, the customs officials. They had keys to warehouses and schedules for every valuable cargo coming in from Europe. Trucks filled with electronics, Swiss watches, fine silks, and French perfume simply vanished into their waiting trucks, redistributed through a network of fences with the cold precision of a Fortune 500 company. The money was a ceaseless river of cash, but it bred a desperate, frantic energy. For Henry, life became a blur of all-night card games in the back room of Robert's Lounge, Jimmy Burke's social club, of snorting lines of cocaine just to keep up with the manic pace of scoring and spending, of placating Karen with ever more extravagant gifts while maintaining a rotating cast of mistresses. The cocaine, initially a tool for endurance, soon became a master. It sharpened his paranoia even as it fueled his bravado, a dangerous cocktail for a man swimming with sharks. And then, in the fall of 1978, the opportunity of a lifetime materialized, born from a whisper passed to Jimmy Burke. A Lufthansa Airlines cargo supervisor, deeply in debt to Jimmy's loan sharks, provided the golden ticket, a detailed manifest and schedule for a regular weekend flight from Frankfurt. The flight would be carrying a staggering, almost mythical payload, untraceable US currency, being repatriated by American soldiers and German banks, a total haul estimated at a minimum of $5 million, with whispers of it being closer to 10. The planning was military grade. Henry, with his intricate knowledge of the airport's personnel and blind spots, was instrumental in the logistics. They recruited a crew of seasoned professionals, each with a specific skill: the lockpicker, the driver, the inside man. They spent weeks rehearsing, mapping every second of the heist, preparing for every contingency. They used stolen IDs, rented vans with plates switched multiple times, and established a sterile, soundproof lockup where the crew would be sequestered after the job. The night of December 11th, 1978, was cold and foggy, perfect cover. Disguised in ski masks and brandishing what seemed like an armory of weapons, they slipped into the airport security void. In under an hour, they subdued the guards, cleared the vault, and loaded $6 million in cash and nearly $1 million in jewelry into their waiting vehicle. It was flawless, clean, the perfect crime. They had pulled off the largest cash robbery in American history. But the true nature of the people Henry had tied his fate to was about to be revealed in a storm of blood. The problem with a perfect score, in Jimmy Burke's world, was the witnesses, the loose ends, the shares to be divided. The money, instead of bringing unity, became a poison. Jimmy Burke, paranoid and ruthless, saw partners not as comrades but as liabilities. The aftermath of Lufthansa was not a celebration. It was a silent, systematic purge. One by one, members of the heist crew, their drivers, their hangers-on, even people who simply knew too much, began to disappear. They were found in car trunks, stripped and shot in the head. They were buried in shallow graves. They vanished without a trace. The lockup became a tomb. Henry watched in cocaine-fueled horror as the human architecture of his life was dismantled. He knew the math of Jimmy's paranoia. He had helped plan the heist. He knew everyone involved. He was a walking, talking conspiracy. And he was not made. He was expendable. The dream curdled into a waking nightmare. The river of cash was now a river of blood, and Henry was drowning in it, desperately snorting more cocaine to numb the terror, watching over his shoulder, waiting for the tap on the shoulder, the friendly invitation to a meeting that he would never return from. The golden boy of the airport, the master hustler, was now trapped in a gilded cage of his own making, and the keeper was a psychopath with a ledger of death, calmly crossing off names. The Omertà, the sacred code of silence he had admired from that Brooklyn sidewalk, was no longer a bond. It was the silent witness to his own impending execution. The noose tightened not with a dramatic arrest, but with a mundane, bureaucratic snafu. In the spring of 1980, Henry was arrested on charges stemming from a brutal beating he administered to a drug dealer who had insulted Karen. It was a personal crime, messy and stupid, a far cry from the clinical precision of the airport scores. But it was the hook the law needed. Facing significant prison time, and with Jimmy Burke's shadow growing longer and more menacing by the day, Henry made a desperate, calculated play for leverage. From his jail cell, using his remaining connections, he orchestrated a massive drug deal, moving pure, pharmaceutical-grade cocaine and quaaludes from Pittsburgh into New York. It was his final, grand hustle, meant to secure enough money and favor to buy his way out of trouble with both the law and the mob. But the operation was compromised from the start. The FBI, having finally pierced the veil of silence around the Lufthansa aftermath, was watching. They saw Henry not just as a target, but as a potential key. When they swooped in, arresting him on narcotics trafficking charges that carried a life sentence, they presented him with a stark, ultimate choice: die in prison as a forgotten soldier of a family that never truly claimed him, or break the ultimate taboo. The decision was, in his own mind, no decision at all. Survival was the only instinct left. The cocaine had hollowed him out, the fear had stripped him bare, and the memory of his disappearing friends, their faces ghosts in his restless nights, pushed him over the edge. Omertà was a myth for those with blood and honor. He had neither. He would talk. What followed was not a mere confession, but an excavation. 4 days, then weeks, then months, Henry Hill sat in sterile, secure rooms, unspooling the inner workings of a secret world. He named names, dates, amounts, and addresses. He described murders in chilling, conversational detail. He mapped the entire anatomy of the Lucchese family's operations at JFK, providing blueprints for hundreds of unsolved hijackings. He detailed the intricate web of corruption that reached into the police department, the courts, and the unions. And, most crucially, he provided the final, missing pieces to the Lufthansa Heist puzzle, identifying the shooters, the planners, the fences, and explicitly pointing the finger at James Burke as the mastermind and the subsequent executioner. His testimony was a tidal wave of information, delivered not with theatrical remorse, but with the weary, matter-of-fact precision of a man reading from a ledger of his own life. He was the first high-profile insider to systematically dismantle the myth of the Mafia's invincibility from the witness stand. The fallout was catastrophic for the world he left behind. Based almost entirely on Hill's testimony, 50 indictments were handed down. Jimmy Burke was convicted for the murders of the Lufthansa crew and would die in prison. Paul Vario, the father figure from the cab stand, was convicted on multiple racketeering charges. The airport racket was dismantled. Henry Hill, the street kid who had longed to be a part of something powerful, had become the instrument of its destruction. He was given a new identity, a new social security number, and was plunged into the federal witness protection program, leaving behind everything: his name, his history, his ill-gotten wealth, and any lingering pretense of the man he once thought he was. He traded a life sentence behind bars for a life sentence of looking over his shoulder, a ghost in the machine of American justice, his old life now just a series of facts in a court transcript, his value reduced to the words he had spoken against his own. The final act of Henry Hill's story is perhaps the most haunting, for it proves that you can flee the mob, but you can never escape yourself. The witness protection program promised a fresh start, a clean slate in some anonymous corner of America. But they could not reprogram a soul forged in the chaotic fires of Brooklyn graft and manic addiction. Henry Hill, now known by various bland, forgettable names, carried his essential nature with him like a congenital disease. He was a creature of action, of hustle, of the adrenaline rush of the score, suddenly deposited into the suffocating quiet of suburban nowhere. He was given a modest stipend, a job selling roofing materials, a beige existence that felt less like a sanctuary and more like a slow, polite death. The man who had orchestrated million-dollar heists now had to budget for groceries. The man who commanded fear and respect with a glance was now a nobody, forbidden from contacting anyone he ever knew, including his own children for a time. The silence was deafening, and he filled it with the only familiar comfort he had left: self-destruction. He began drinking heavily. He quickly found the local criminal underworld, however small time, and dove right back in, running scams, dealing drugs, violating the sacred rules of his protection with a reckless defiance that drove his FBI handlers to despair. He was arrested again, for drunk driving, for disorderly conduct, for probation violations. Each arrest threatened to blow his cover, to expose the fragile new identity the government had constructed. He became, in essence, a tourist in the world of normalcy, perpetually homesick for a homeland that no longer existed and wanted him dead. In 1987, he cooperated with journalist Nicholas Pileggi to write the book Wise Guy, which became the bedrock for Martin Scorsese's cinematic masterpiece, Goodfellas. For a moment, he was famous again, not as a feared gangster, but as a cautionary legend. The movie's success, however, only deepened his exile. It etched his old life in celluloid glory, a constant, taunting reminder of what he had lost, even as it romanticized the very horrors that had forced him to run. He made appearances, gave interviews, a ghost commenting on his own biography. But the money from the book and film deals dried up, spent as fast as it came on his old vices. He was bounced from one WITSEC location to another as his behavior compromised each safe house. He lived in Omaha, in Cincinnati, in Seattle, in Topanga Canyon, a rootless specter leaving a trail of chaos, debt, and broken promises in his wake. He was a terrible witness, a worse protected person, and an impossible husband. Karen left him. Finally. His children struggled with the fractured legacy he bestowed upon them. The final years were a sad, public unraveling. He was kicked out of the Witness Protection Program for good after being arrested for buying cocaine in 1996. The government washed its hands of him. Now truly on his own, he was a marked man with no guardian angels, relying on the faded notoriety of his past to sell autographs and make appearances at memorabilia shows, a carnival sideshow of his own life. The tough, sharp-suited hustler from Robert's Lounge was now a bloated, grey-haired man in a baseball cap, telling the same stories for a fee, always glancing at the door. He died in 2012, not from a mob hit in a dark alley as the world might have predicted, but from heart failure in a Los Angeles hospital after a long illness. His end was as mundane as his beginnings were dramatic. In the final analysis, Henry Hill was a man caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. He was too criminal for the straight world, and too pragmatic, too faithless for the criminal one. He shattered Omertà not for justice, but for a desperate, selfish chance to breathe another day. He traded one prison for another, finding that the most inescapable prison was the one built by his own nature. He was the boy who wanted everything the mob had to offer, the power, the money, the respect, only to discover, too late, that the price was his own soul. And in the end, the most shocking truth of all is not that he betrayed the Mafia, but that after everything, the heists, the blood, the testimony, the hiding, Henry Hill never really found a self to save. He remained, until his last breath, the kid from across the street, forever watching the cab stand, forever on the outside looking in. If this journey into the real, unvarnished shadows of history held you captive, then you understand that truth is often stranger and darker than fiction. We dedicate ourselves to bringing these meticulously researched, human stories to light. To ensure you never miss a deep dive into the forgotten chapters and complex figures that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe.